bursts up through rush of foam, twisting, turning head and tail, flailing, bronze-flecked trout, ready for beheading and gutting. But he lays out his catch on the bank, loosens the hook, slips it back to the suck, quiet as flaggers. I ought to have said in advance that flaggers are the yellow flag iris. My place is not exactly landscape because its main presence is the sea, either between the shores of the great Severn estuary where I live and walk most days, or between some of the islands of my heart, the Isles of Scilly off the very west tip of Cornwall, or the coastal islands of Estonia in the Baltic Sea. All these places were known and loved by a late friend for whom this sequence of sonnets between the islands, it's a kind of elegy, obliquely, or perhaps a conversation of a conversation we never quite had. It's also an inquiry into the tact with which we can write about other people whose lives touch ours. I won't say any more, but let 6 of these sonnets flow end to end. Between the islands. Beyond the outer rocks, the open sea, event horizon, foam fringe like a white stain on clean darkness. The delivery of weather rumbles far on in the night. Big wind that leans too close, testing the seams of the house, which whimpers. Wordlessness. Is this the point? It tucks us in. Sweet dreams. Or it bends closer, the enormous kiss of an Atlantic low, its heavy skirts curled round us. Starfish on the window ledge from strangers' holidays. Where in the world are we? Or out of it? We're on the edge more often than we think. Then one of us is nowhere. Sorry, just to write the word us feels presumptuous. A sentimental error, this, to see islands as fact, the sea as absence, unplumbed, salt, estranging. No, the sea's the living thing. It's the act of itself. The islands, the accidents of changing tides. One ruck of the bedrock has a crust of humus, blown or birdchat seeds, decay, making, remaking itself. It has rains, time, and us. Another's just lodging enough among the breaking spray for the continual shriek and wheel of seabirds. Another, no more than a snag in the swell, where it goes crimped or glassy to reveal, conceal the reef. We can give it a name, a light, a bell, the wolf, the manacles. Nothing of us lives there but words. As if a word could fix things, friends adrift. The sea won't care. The edge of things. Grey swell imploding draws curtains of spray, draws and tears them, white on white, some tatters sheer off, gulls. Because all this is silent, from this distance, now I write this litany. Hanjagu, Menavaur, Geninik, Crebawadhan, Roseveen, Gorrigan, Mincarlo. language further out from shore than Cornish, more like seal speech, a translation of the same and changing sea shapes. Now shags measuring their wing beats to the dips of waves they skim, the whir of puffins, how terns pin themselves, still almost, by their wingtips to the sky. Can I, who you would smile, pretend I don't do ritual, share this, the great calm surge, land and languages end. White sailboat heading in the last effects of light for the sea lock, blue shading to grey as the cliff's shadow spreads. It inflects things into elegy, stealing them away from themselves. This is an act of piracy. Let go. Holding the pen gives me no right to legislate. Let you be who it needs to be. If heading homewards before nightfall comes to hand, too timely as a sign for dying, the tide tables are its text, no other book, no metaphor, not mine, not even yours. When you were readying to go, I had to read it in the paper. It was news to me. It's that, believe me, I'm talking to myself, I find hard to excuse. The ice road is open. This is what they do on trust. Dim haloed car lights following each other, not too close or distant, through months-long white dusk, flurries swallowing their tracks. Beneath its frozen crust, the almost tideless Baltic, scarcely salt. On a shore without a foreshore, boulders wait, lost children of the ice sheet. This is more like tact, like friendship than like love, that word that wants to conquer worlds. Here we can meet between islands so wide and flat they're like horizon inked in. Here the clarity of cool north light, nights longer, loss and gain. They listen for the news. The ice road is open. We can cross. And finally, a postcard from the plains of Dogger, wetlands glittering with marsh pools as the cold in the bones of the earth relents. Don't forget the tracks, follow the beasts between old inlets, easing, intricating into wider creeks. All of our lives, the change had seemed like seepage. Then one night, the gush, the tide comes in forever. What's left? A world dreamed like this, from friends, bright moments, and between brief crossings. Here, uneasy winks of light mark channels. You would know what I mean by addressing an absence. Lend me yours. To write as if to someone, as if something might respond beyond the words, the outer rocks, the open sea, beyond that, just beyond. And I'll hand over to Heidi by reading her poem, The Rain in the Night, a poem whose lightness of touch yet breadth of resonance I really admire. How the weather that encloses us all embodies this sense of our small place in a world of greater griefs and histories. This is The Rain in the Night. The past is falling on the house, lightly, insistently, with its own unnamable scent. I can't tell when the first mist of it began to drift down, lifting itself gently down. It wasn't there, then it was, all around the house, moving across the roof with a patterning I couldn't recognize. In a way, there wasn't much of it, but such slivers bear down over time. The roof gradually succumbs to a fresh deepening colour. The night insects bed down out of the spattering, the wisteria darkens, drops petals. Even a light scattering leaves its mark in the morning, even if the surface dries. The soft past of rain has shaken itself on the house defenseless against its lightness. Thank you, friends.
Thank you so much, Philip. It's wonderful to be here reading with you both. And what a treat to hear you read one of my poems. Thank you so much. And I'm going to repay the favour by beginning with one of Philip's poems that resonates with me. It's called Equator, and it's got an epigraph, which is Rimbaud, the last photograph. And I take it to be about a man on the far edge of his life, perhaps facing his final night. And for me, it's also about how a moment transforms into the past. Equator. Dark, snow falling, snow in Africa. And through it, this horizon, this equator. This crease, fold or fault line in a bleached out photograph, or life. I am already half a memory, the image of an image, sun-blotched, damp-stained, falling between distances, alone, poised, paused, like a wish, like a what? You lose sight of me here, on the lip of the known world, down the crack between the future that I lusted for and what will be the past. Yes, I could be at home in these shadows and rumours, with fever trees, blinding cracks of sunlight, with bird shrieks and river mist rising. So we cross the line. Into the dark we go. And I'll be reading my poems from Return by Minor Road, which came out last year. And it focuses on my time living in Scotland. I moved there when I was 18 and I lived there till I was 30. It was a very, very formative time for me. I went to university, I got my first job, I got married, I made lifelong friends, and we go back regularly. I had very many happy times there. But in 1996, we were living in Dunblane when a gunman entered the local primary school and opened fire on a class of 5 and 6-year-olds and their teacher. I didn't have children then, but I had friends and colleagues whose children were shot, and I worked as a cleaner while I was at the university, and without having met them, I'd actually cleaned a couple of the bedrooms of the children. So this book focuses on that time, but also on the beauty of the natural landscape there and how I carry that with me too. From the hallway, you can see into every corner of our small flat. From the kitchen window, the rose garden, the golf course, the Trossachs. From the bath, you can see Glen roads, sky and sky framed. From tomorrow, all this will be different. Monochrome. The last time I saw you, really saw you, was in the office that day when the announcement started to come, but no one understood yet what had happened. You stood up, sharply pushed back your chair so it straggled across the passageway. Your tidy desk lay exposed to dust that would build between stacked papers. As you walked away, you were pale, your face open. I saw you again at the funeral, but couldn't see you, really. Couldn't see anything. Not because of the tears, but the blankness my eyes and brain held. And my heart. It's true that the heart halts as it hurts on. I read you in the papers, friend. I see you and I read you, and I wish to hold your monochrome hand as it rests across that small child's head. Cold spring. A day like habit, unbroken. Our house on the hill, the pheasant, the Siamese, the ducks, breeze blocks painted over, the cupboard from hell, coat rack, junk store, circular window. Ice stumbling from inside the window panes. The path lock still. Watching the birds above, the clouds, the wind, all. The bridge, the river. Flexi time, clock in, mugs, cups, coffee run, coats, steaming, eyes, nose, streaming, folders out, earphones on, files, notes, pen, switch, screen, welcome, detail. Manager says, incident. No one moment with another, frozen, unaware, of falling, order unfurled, of meaning, shut down, shared out, astray, happening to, unexpected, unprepared, nothing to prevent. Those moments when the children you know, you think are still. There is none, there is none. A hair's breadth, a single hair on there, no. Incoherent bystander. Midday home, whole country calling, black words strung between mobile masts. The name of our place, repeated until you want to jolt awake, you want. All falls, through, against, around, beyond, all falls, broken. There is a crying that is bone. Calls. You're there, the voice says, then halts. What else to say? Yes, we're here. I nod, I carry on nodding at the white plastic handset, the slab of the base, the cord twisting away through the wires to everywhere else. What else to say? We're here where the news is, where the day won't stop, where the phone keeps ringing late into the evening. Each time the same redundant speech, the same necessary reaching. We couldn't get through. I cup the earpiece against my skull, the mouthpiece against my cheek. It warms with contact. I know, I say eventually, and it means all it means. To Myatt. Some days we cried ourselves out, packed our coats and climbed the soggy rock to its small summit. There was something about stepping one by one beside each other, without speaking, without the need. At the summit, we kept numb vigil for what we couldn't say. We descended in mist, our blurry outlines mottling together. On spring days now, when cold tips the hills, I can still see its cairn and trig point, that chopped obelisk at its peak, distant sheepfolds, memorials of snow. Balquhidder. After the bumpy, miles-long track, we stored ourselves in a far cottage beyond water. Small dogs visited us and scurried something solemn out the door with them. Thin place, where heaven and the afterlife lie close to the surface of the day. I bathed and slept and cried. You walked. We were colder than we'd ever been, despite the fire. Even when I watched smoke chugging slowly from our own chimney that day, I couldn't connect. Were we smoke? Were we cold? Were we left? And I'll finish with a poem of Jane's that I really admire for its lyric beauty and its openness and its tenderness. It's called Lullaby. Try as he might, he couldn't hush the baby's crying. He carried her out to the yard, showed her pullets pecking at scraps, ewes snuffling oats, calves tucked up in straw, but she wouldn't be consoled. He sat with her on a sack of barley in the barn, lifted a handful that smelled of molasses, and began to speak of reaping, threshing, winnowing grain, dust and chaff clinging to sweat as they bent to stook sheaves. He hummed the thrashers thrumming, and by the time he got to the twisters that sent wisps of straw circling like spirits above their heads, she slept. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Heidi, for that reading, and thanks, Philip, for your reading. It's quite something to follow, both of you, because it's very powerful listening to you, and very moving. And I suppose I do want to say hello to the audience. It's just really exciting to be here with all of you. And I see that there are people from Denmark, Spain, Ireland, and all over the UK, and maybe a few countries I didn't notice coming in there. So that's just lovely for us. So I'm actually going to start with a poem by Heidi, and it's the penultimate poem in her beautiful book. And funnily enough, Heidi and Philip and I have all written a lot of river poems along the way. And I think all of us rivers have been important in themselves, and also as a symbol of loss and change, and also a symbol, particularly in this poem, I feel it's a symbol of persistence, and the persistence that gives us hope after difficult times. Winter River. Though it looks unrivered, this is not a riverless place. In blizzard, the water is silenced. Flakes swallow the river whole. Rock, boulder, bank grow into absences. Ice freezes and refreezes into sediment. The storm settles for so many days, then the river is first to break free. In a slow unwrapping, the snow begins to loosen, crumble like foam. The river begins to sprout. Dull steel boulders edge out again. No spring is needed, no green shoots. The cry of a small bird will do it. Whatever it takes, the river keeps going. The river knows the way beneath the snows. So I'll be reading this evening from my collection that came out in 2019, When the Tree Falls. And in the 4 years I was writing it, my father was becoming weaker and iller and was in and out of hospital quite a bit. And then in the last 4 months of his life, we nursed him at home. And so the poems are poems of loss and mourning, but they're also, I suppose, celebration of the preciousness of time with people we love and in places we love. So I'll start with 2 poems in the years when my father was becoming weaker. He stood at the top of the stairs, insisting he could go down himself, but like a frightened bullock refusing the crush, his body wouldn't move from the spot where I used to sit in the dark, listening to rows in the kitchen when my mother showed him the bill from the shop. He stood at the top of the stairs in a fever that came on him as fast as nightfall in winter. Steep, narrow steps between him and the ambulance ticking outside the back door. He stood there in check pajamas and thick Wellington socks in the house where he was born and swore he would never leave. I held him from behind, my brother in front, coaxing with a tenderness I'd never seen between them. Come on, Dad. Just one step, one step. That I could take away from him these long days in the hospital, the digging for a vein in his arm, the drip that stops him sleeping, the pain that makes him whisper, Jesus Christ, oh Jesus Christ. That I could take him back to his cobblestones and barn, his rooks and the birch trees, his nettles and ditches, limestone and bog. That I could find the words to tell him what he will always be. Horse chestnut petals falling pink in the yard, the well hidden in a blackthorn thicket, a summer evening's hush, cattle standing orange in the shallows. I probably should have said before I read the two poems, but it's very obvious, I'm sure, that I grew up on a farm in County Roscommon. I'm reading in County Wicklow tonight, where I live with my wife. I've been living here 25 years. But I lived the first 17 years of my life on that farm in County Roscommon. And when I came to write about my father, I had to write about the farm because it's where he lived all his life, and he loved every inch of it, and he loved every tree on it. And so that in a way was why it became When the Tree Falls. The title is from a wonderful Mary Lavin short story, one of the finest Irish short story writers to my mind. So then moving on, one of the three poems, TREE poems, is what I'm going to read now. Cypress. Falling in and out of sleep all night, he suddenly struggles to sit up. Will you open the curtains so we'll see the dawn when it comes? He gazes out at the cypress that in his lifetime grew higher than the house. A tree that survived every winter's wind, its trunk ridged as a raised bed ready for seed. Feathered foliage set to sprout flower balls, exposed roots worn bare as bones. Branches touching the ground, forming a haven, a tree to sit in, quiet, waiting. And then I wanted to read a poem. So that was in that quiet. There is a lot of waiting when you're nursing someone at home, probably anybody who's experienced that. You know, a lot of quiet time, which can be, again, a difficult time and a precious time. But for the last 3 nights of my father's life, we had a hospice nurse with us. And this poem, people often ask me, how does a poem start? And for me, it's often some emotion that's kind of snagging. It's like it snags, like the way a briar snags a jumper or a sweater. It's like that emotion is snagging at my heart. And then when I find the way of expressing it, that's when the poem gets started. So, Night Nurse. If he were conscious, he'd urge her to sit beside him for questions about her people over cups of tea. But she says no more than needs to be said as I help her turn him, check for bed sores, connect the morphine pump. She tells me it won't be long, knows when to gather the others. It happens quickly in the end. She leaves us together, and when we're ready, helps wash his body. My brother flings the windows open, still dark, the air wetted with frost. Herefords lowing from their slatted sheds, the choir he'd have chosen. She collects her watch, torch, and glasses. I don't want her to go. When she leaves for home across the curlews, she'll be taking him with her. And it was a year after that happened that I was talking to friends and I was saying what it was like, how I had just this strong feeling that if the nurse went, he'd be gone too. And it was in the talking of it out that I found a way of writing about that. So I'm reading 2 more poems from the collection, and this one from, again, the penultimate poem in the collection, I want to read tonight for Monize Alvey, who is a good friend of Heidi's, and I'm sure Philip knows her as well. She's another Bloodaxe poet, and she cast her wonderful eye over my collection at an earlier stage, and it was I had the title, and she said maybe you could write a poem for the title. So I'm reading it for her tonight as a thank you for that wonderful suggestion. When the tree falls into the river, it slows the current. Water pools in the hollows it makes. Pike and trout find a new place to hide. Beetles, mayfly, and mites feed on leaf litter. The mossy trunk lies still as a bridge. A kingfisher settles, watches for minnow. Branches reach for the light, noble with new buds. And maybe just to add that partly that poem came from my nephew having a baby. And it was something in the year after my father died. And it was something about that cycle of life and death and rebirth. And, you know, that is, that helps. And I think a river, again, a bit like Heidi's poem, a river is such a good symbol of that. Anyway, so for my last poem from my collection tonight, this is a poem that I wrote that came to me about 18 months after my father died. And in the beginning, I just didn't feel he was anywhere. And it was just this sense of desolation. And then about 18 months later, I realized that he was there. Kelly's Garden. You can find him in the names of the fields. Kelly's Garden, Bachanoctons, Malbrannans, the Sandhole, the Quarry, the Rocks. He's stacking square bales, chanting knots in and down, so rain won't lodge in their hearts. March and he's cursing merciless wind, cattle running amok. He's laughing at MacAleer's joke about the father who welcomes his eldest home from Alberta or Azerbaijan with the only question that matters, were there many on the bus? You can hear him in the jackdaws chack-chack up high on galvanized roofs, and in his whistling that rises and falls like the curlew calling from Emla Bog. And I'm going to finish with a poem by Philip Gross. But before I read Philip's poem, I do want to thank the Staying at Home Festival on behalf of the three poets, the three of us. I want to thank the festival for inviting us to read and for giving us this wonderful opportunity. I want to thank all of our audience for tuning in. There's so many things for people to be going to on Zoom online at the moment, and I know that people can be torn with various commitments. So we know it's a privilege to read to you all. I want to thank our publisher, Bloodaxe Books. We are very lucky to have that publisher, wonderful publisher. And so I will finish with a poem by Philip Gross. Philip was my tutor, the director of the course where I did my MPhil. I have to say, it is wonderful to read with him tonight. He was a wonderful tutor, and it's a real pleasure to read with him and Heidi. So this poem is actually from Deep Field, which is a marvelous collection about Philip's father. So maybe that's where I'm making the connection tonight. It's a collection of sadness about the loss the loss he saw for his father losing language, but it's also it's a wonderful collection of love and celebration of language and of what the son and the father shared very deeply. Scry. In memory of crosswords that he used to unpick seamlessly from blankness into words, the kind with no black squares, whose syntax I could scarcely guess at. Here's a word to peer into, scry, the way I try to peer into my father in his ruined study. Scry, I've been turning it round in my hands, this crystal ball, this cryptic syllable. like a smoke bubble under a shrug of dusty velvet, there to hold the punter's gaze, while Madame Xenia reads them, reads the pauses in their questions through and through. Scry, from the scry, by now I'm deep into chambers like him on Don't Disturb Dad's Thinking afternoons. By aphesis, the loss of a sound so near aphasia on the page. Aphoresis, more lost phonemes in between and distractingly aphelion, the furthest removed from the light in our eccentric orbits. And a scry, Spencerian, old-fangled, from describe, something between the two is what I'm doing now. His Zymenes was child's play compared to this. I don't think I can solve it. Against all sense, I keep hoping that he might.